dress of white. Over there, over there. Oh, think of the home over there, over there, over there, over there. Oh, think of a home over there. I'll soon be at home over there. For the end of my journey I see many dear to my heart over there are watching and waiting for me. Over there, over there, I'll soon be at home over there, over there, over there, over there. I'll soon be at home over there.
Brother Mike Allen, if you would take us, Lord, in prayer this morning.
Gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we're thankful for this another day you've given us, Lord, for the homecoming day we come together, worship you in spirit and truth. We're thankful, Lord, for a homecoming that we're looking for when our blessed, holy, glorious Savior Jesus steps out on the cloud of glory. That's the homecoming we're looking for, but we're celebrating today just remembering all that you've done for us, and we just pray that you just have your way in our services down through today. May you bless our teachers, Lord, as they take charge of classes. Bless the word, Lord, as it goes out. It will speak to our hearts and lives. Help us, Lord, to learn and grow and get closer to you. We just pray for Brother Adam today as he brings the message that, Lord, you would just use him, Father. And we just pray that if there's one today that's lost and needed the Savior, they come to find you before it's too late. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated. I was anxious to hear if he was going to pray in French or not, but thankful to have Brother Mike back with us. He was talking to Dad when I walked in, telling us some of his stories, and all the more reason I'm perfectly content to stay in southeastern Ohio. So, but it is good to have him back, and it's good to see everybody out here on this homecoming morning. Any announcements this morning? All right. If not, we'll let teachers be in charge at this time.
Morning, Dwight. How you doing? Okay. How are you? Doing well.
What you done with all your spare time? Not taking care of the pigs, feeding pigs, walking pigs?
Jason Lexi around. She's usually averaging but 3 to 4 games or a week, or sometimes 5. Yeah, she's usually 3 volleyball games a week, and then football. And last week she had 3 games, homecoming on Friday, and then she had a game again yesterday. So, yeah, chasing her around.
All right, that's good. That's good.
Good morning. You're probably like, why? Why didn't you leave? Well, they searched high and low trying to find a good homecoming teacher, and then they asked me. No, I do count it a privilege anytime I get the opportunity to teach. I tell my class, our high school college class, I said, I don't even like to consider myself as a teacher, maybe a discussion leader. I like to discuss. I feel like that's the best way that we can learn. So as we go through this lesson this morning, if you have any thoughts or insights, please, by all means, share them. I feel like we can all gain something valuable from that. Typically, when we do have a homecoming teacher come in, we don't really follow the quarterly. So I do have it's a different lesson. We're not going to follow the quarterly this morning. Just to give you a little bit of background, I mentioned this, I think, a few weeks ago from the pulpit, kind of how this thought came to my mind. And it was about one of the messages that Cal Ray preached. He preached some tremendous messages the week of the revival. But he preached on David and Goliath. and we're going to read a little bit about David and Goliath, but I'm not going to necessarily teach the story of David and Goliath in the context that we typically think of it. I'm going to take a little bit of a different look at it. And one of the things that he talked about that night was he kind of went piece by piece with the things that David took when he actually went to fight Goliath. Talked about the staff, talked about the shepherd's bag, talked about all these various tools that he had. But one thing that he said that night that really, really hit home, and that thought resonated with me for a long time, still does to this day, obviously, because that's what I'm going to talk about this morning, was the stones that David took out of that brook. Now, I'm a pretty simple-minded person, so a lot of times I look at things with a very simplistic approach. And, it'd be real easy to say that, well, he just went down to the creek and he grabbed 5 rocks. I don't think it was that simple. I think from the foundations of the earth, those rocks were formed and molded and made by our Heavenly Father for a specific purpose on that day and at that time. So I want to ask you a question this morning. I don't necessarily want to look at, we're going to read verses obviously about David and Goliath. And we're going to talk about David and his willingness and his obedience and so forth. But there was a particular implement that was used that day to bring Goliath down and to claim victory for the armies of Israel. Are we willing to be that implement? And are we willing to be used of God? So that's the thought that I want to go through this morning. I'd like to ask Dad if he would to ask the blessing on the lesson this morning. Amen. So, I'm going to go through a lot. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'm going to look at various verses there. That's going to be the majority of the reading. But then I am going to go to a lot of other verses after that. But the bulk of the reading will be in 1 Samuel 17. And this is the story of David and Goliath. So I think most of us, by looking around here, most of us know that story. We've heard it preached and taught several different times. So not going to go into a lot of the backstory on that, but we're going to start in verse 15, just kind of setting the stage for the willingness of David to take upon the Lord's task that he had for him on that particular day. So starting in 15, it says, "But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn," or which is essentially a bushel, "of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren." So what we see here is we see in the valley of Elah, we see the 2 armies on either side. We see the army of Israel on one side, and we see the Philistine army on the other. And what we see is this giant of a man, 9-foot tall Goliath, a champion of the Philistines. And this was not uncommon in these days for a particular army to have a champion, as they would call it, go out and literally taunt or try to draw out a champion from the other army to fight. So we see for 40 days and 40 nights, we see morning and evening, Goliath coming out and taunting the armies of the Lord. And so you got to remember, in these days, it's not like it is now. These were not, the governments were not providing things for their soldiers. This wasn't a battlefield situation where there were MREs and so forth. It was basically up to you to provide your own sustenance. So Jesse sends David out for his other brothers to take food to them, take food and supplies to them. Well, as David gets there, he sees this battle ongoing, and he sees this taunting back and forth between Goliath and the Israeli army. So David can't figure out, why doesn't somebody do something? But you got to remember, you put yourself in the position. Here's a 9-foot, battle-hardened, trained warrior. I don't know that I would be real willing to say, yeah, I'll go fight him. But we see that David comes in there, and it's real easy to say, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. But you see David that goes there, and one of the things I've always said, and I'll say this as well. When we read stories in the Bible, we can read them and we can get encouragement. But one thing I always encourage our class when we talk about that is let's really try when we read to put ourselves in the positions of the people that we're reading about. It's real easy to cast judgment and say, well, I wouldn't have done that, or I wouldn't have done this, or whatever the case may be. But one thing that I've always thought from David's point of view, David, it says he was a young man. We don't know the exact age, but I think back of those days and in my brashness and in my youth, and sometimes that's a little bit of what it takes. But I think about David going in there. Well, if no one else will, I will. So David goes to Saul and he convinces him. He says, look, I'm a shepherd. I take care of my flock. I've had a bear come upon my flock and try to take sheep. I took down that bear. I've killed a lion that's come to try to take down my sheep. It's just another man. I'll take him down too. And, so David, the willingness to step out. And then also, this is also, I think, the shows the Lord's working upon this miracle. Saul's willingness to let David go fight him. So let's pick back up in 38.
Maybe, Sean, if he had that big gun that Liam had last night.
It'd have been a little easier, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, Liam had a very interesting firearm last night. We all tried to shoot a clay pigeon with it. I don't think anyone was successful, but it was fun to shoot. So picking up in 38, it says, and Saul armed David with his armor, and he put on a helmet of brass upon his head, and he also armed him with a coat of mail. But I like this verse. 39, and David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. So David put him off. So Saul tries to give him his armor, which would have been probably the best armor out there, the king's armor. But, David being a young man probably doesn't fit right. Guys, we've all been there. We get a little older. We get a little bit more. Mike was talking about that being in Paris, everybody being so skinny. We eat good over here. Saul's older and probably fully matured, probably, has a little bit bigger. So the armor probably doesn't fit right. And then David's not a man of war. He doesn't know how to move and wear armor. He's a shepherd. He's a lowly shepherd. And he says, I've not proved these, or I've not used these. I don't even know how to use these. Let me go. And in verse 40, he says, and he took here's the verse I want to look at. And he took his staff in his hand, and he chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Let's skip down to 44. It says, and the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with a sword, not with a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and he took thence a stone, and he slang it. And he smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. What a story. What a miracle. We see something here that David was accomplished through the Lord's will, something that most people would say almost impossible. Here's this champion, this hulking 9-foot man that the armies of Israel had been cowering under for several days now. And what did he take him down with? 1 smooth stone. I want to ask you the question this morning. Are we willing and are we able to put our selfish pride aside and be that instrument and that implement that God would have us to be to see miracles? The same God that helped David and delivered the armies of Israel that day is the same God that we're here to serve this morning. So that's what I want to look at. We're going to start, what I want to look at is some characteristics of a creek stone. And I want to, again, just kind of put yourself in the mind of David reaching in this brook and pulling out these stones and thinking about that. God himself is here this morning. Maybe there's a work for you to do. Maybe God is wanting to reach down and have you do something. And I want to talk about the characteristics of these stones. And I think we're going to be able to see it's going to be a lot like us in our daily lives today. So, excuse me. I think that during the creation, this is using my sanctified imagination. I tell my class sometimes, sometimes we do have to use our sanctified imagination. We have to kind of fill in the blanks. And I always tell everybody, I say, you're not going to necessarily find this listed in the Bible. You'll find, Dan Bouts and I used to talk about this. Dan would say, you'll find this in 2 Daniel. And I tell my class sometimes, you'll find this one in 1 John. This is just me using my sanctified imagination. But I wonder, when God created the heavens and the earth, if he didn't, as he's forming this and he's creating this beautiful, beautiful landscape, as he's forming these unbelievable majesties, if when he forms a certain rock, he says, right there, that's the one. That's the one that in a few years, that's the one that's going to bring down Goliath. I believe he did. I believe he has a plan. I believe just as he had a plan for that stone, he's got a plan for each and every one of us. So I want to talk about some of the characteristics and how that stone got there and how did we end up here today. September 22nd, 2024, you're sitting in this pew. You're not sitting in this pew by chance. You're sitting here because at the same time when this rock and this stone was formed, God had a plan for you and God knew you were going to be here this morning. So let's talk about these rocks. First thing typically that a river stone or a creek stone will have, it's broken. It's part of a larger rock that has been broken. So, has anyone here ever been broken? Anyone here ever had things that has gone on in your life that make you feel like you're just broken to your absolute core? Well, you could say, yeah, well, I'm damaged goods. I'm broken. Or you could say, yeah, look at me. I'm broken. My life's in shambles. I've got rough edges. I've got creases. I've got cracks. But guess what? Here in a few years, you're going to see the transition that these stones go through. They get polished, they get worn, they get molded into something else that turned into a beautiful stone later on. Psalms 147:3 says, he healeth the broken in heart, and he bindeth up their wounds. Even when we're broken, we can put our faith and trust in God, and he is there to take care of the situations that we face. Psalms 34:18, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. God doesn't call the perfect. He calls the broken. We need to be broken of our will and of our spirit, and are broken of our desires to be transformed into something to be used for his good. Just as that rock was likely broken at some point, that rock eventually was polished and molded by God himself through the creeks and the streams and the storms of life to be used at a certain time for his good. Another way that these stones are formed is abrasion. So what's abrasion? The definition of abrasion? It's a wearing, grinding, or rubbing away by friction. Think that there's not some abrasion in this life? There's absolutely some abrasion that goes on here. So as these stones go down the creek and they rub against one another and they smash against one another through the mud, the clay, the other rocks, the edges start to get worn down. They start smoothing out. The rough textures on the outside start smoothing down. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. Healthy interaction and constructive conflict, it's important. It's not always fun. But that's why it's very, very important to surround yourself and to rub up against people of a like mind. You start rubbing up against the world, you start rubbing up against them, the characteristics of those individuals and what their passions and their desires are, they're going to rub off on you. But you surround yourself in good Christian company, And when, there can be some self-correction that goes on. And there can be, you start seeing that my desires are flowing toward your desires. So it's very, very, especially you younger people that are in here, it's so, so very important to make sure that the company you keep is of a like mind and of a like goal. Because it's, as we've said so many times, I could stand here on the altar and I could have Kenny stand up here. I could try to pull him up, but I probably would not be able to pull him up to where I'm at. But very, very easily, he would be able to pull me off that altar. It's so much easier to get pulled down. And it's a whole lot easier to get your edges rubbed and polished by the world if you're not careful. So we need to make sure that we keep a good company. Likewise, and I'm going to use a pun here in just a second, but it's very, very important that as we rub up against people, that we rub against them the right way. Proverbs 18:19 says, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. Let's make sure that as we go out, and listen, daily life, we have interaction, we can't avoid it. I've often said a lot of times with my job, I said, I would love my job if it wasn't for people. But guess what? That's part of the job, right? I mean, we go out into this world and we have no choice. We're going to interact. So let's make sure that as we interact and as we're rubbing against somebody, let's make sure that we're polishing them in the right way. So here's my no pun intended here, but let's not rub others the wrong way. Okay? Let's make sure that as we're floating down the streams of life, and as we're rubbing against one another and we're interacting with one another, let's make sure that people see the good in our lives. Let's make sure, I've used this example, I think I used it last week talking about it, that we're the Kenny McKnights of the world, that, man, I want what that person has. As we rub against one another, going down this stream of life, let's make sure that we're being the example that God would have us to be. Just as that stone that David plucked out of the stream there, let's make sure that we're in a position to be used of God when God calls. Another way that these stones are created and forged is through erosion. So erosion, or it's the wearing away of the materials that happens as water and sand rub and smash and beat against the stone time and time again over several years in many cases. The Bible never promises us that life's going to be easy. Just as these stones that tumble down the brooks as the waters rise and fall and freeze and thaw and all these different situations that come, life comes at us every day and can sometimes be a complete assault on us many, many times. However, when that happens and this erosion in our lives start taking place, sometimes we see a wonderful thing happen. As the layers get peeled back, the softness, maybe the non-useful parts of this stone and this rock get washed away, and then you see the beauty that comes from it sometimes inside of these stones. As your layers get peeled back, as life comes at you, as you face situations, what are we revealing? When you start peeling back the outer man, what's inside? What's the inner man? What are we really portraying? A lot of times adversity will bring out a person's character. You got two choices. You can get better or you can get bitter. I'm so very thankful. I've seen a lot of people in this church have gone through things that I don't know. I really don't know. I like to think that by the grace of God, I would be strong enough to go through, but I really don't know. And I've seen them go through, and I've seen them go through, even though sometimes it might even be a little bit of a forced smile. I've seen them come through with joy. There's a difference between happiness and joy, but I've seen them go through those trials and those tribulations with joy. And I've seen as those layers were peeled back, and as that life eroded away, I've seen them come through on the other side. So very, very important to make sure that as we go through and as we face these things, that we show others the true inner man and the love of Christ that's in our heart. Psalms 23:4, this was the verse that just came to my mind as I went through this. We could all quote it. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. We can't avoid the things of this world, the troubles, the trials, the tribulations. They're going to come. But so many times we focus on the here and now. When our salvation, we need to be looking up. Our redemption draweth nigh. And the things of this world, they are temporal. You don't have any choice. You will be worn down. You will be eroded. However, let's make sure that as those layers get peeled back, that when we get to the inner part, let's make sure that we have a clear conscience inside. The last process I want to look at as far as where these stones ended up is transportation. So how do these rocks and these creek stones and river stones, how do they end up where they are? Well, there's many forms. Snow melt, glaciers, landslides, volcanoes, but most generally are swift waters. Life, again, it's not always a babbling brook, is it? There are the flash floods, there are the storms, there are the things of life that take us out of one spot. You know, so it can be one phone call, one text, completely change your life. Very, very quickly, life changes, and the next thing you know, you're fighting one of life's great storms and one of life's great battles. But we can put our faith and trust in the one that controls that storm, that controls that rainfall, that controls those waters. Though my mind immediately, as I was reading about the process of how this, I was thinking about the floods and how the water rising, the stormy seas. I went to Mark 39. We've been preached so many times, we all know the story. But when Jesus and the disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee, Mark 4:39, he's asleep in the boat. They go down and wake him up, and they say, Master, we're not going to make it. And he goes and he stands on the bow of the boat, and it says, and he arose and he rebuked the wind, and he said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Luke 8:25, and he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they being afraid wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and water, and they obey him. We can't avoid the storms of life. And we're going to be moved. We may find ourselves in that cool little babbling brook with beautiful scenery and everything's great. The next thing you know, here comes the torrential rains and the floods of this earth, and we get completely dislodged, and we find ourselves in completely unfamiliar territory. We find ourselves in a situation saying, Lord, save me. I'm not going to make it through this. Well, guess what? The same God that stood on that boat over 2,000 years ago and raised his hands and said, Peace, be still, that's the same God that we're praying to today. If he did it for them, he can do it for us. And he will do it for us if we put our faith and trust in him. So as we face the turbulent waters, let's take heart and take solace in the fact that the same God that we pray to, the same God that's been prayed to for 2,000 years, that can calm the storm, that can literally walk on the water, is the same God that can calm the storms and calm and give us the peace in our lives. So now we see how it was likely that these stones ended up in the brook, how they were transformed, how they were changed, how they ended up there, how they had likely been weathered and traversed great distances likely to be used for God's plan. I think there's a lot of similarities to how we are today. We've all faced many things in our life that have put us in the position that we're at. But God has a plan for each and every one of us. If you're here and you don't know him as your Savior, which looking around here, I think probably the overwhelming majority of us are saved. But if you don't, God has a plan for you. And that plan is for you to be saved. On this very homecoming, what a day to be saved on a homecoming. And then you can look forward to the great homecoming. But if we're here and you are saved, and maybe you're just like a stone. You've been comfortable for a long time. You've been in that babbling brook, and things have been going well, and you're like, well, things are good. But maybe you've had a little bit of a calling on your life. Excuse me. You've had a thought that, man, I think there's more that I could do. Well, why don't you this morning be thinking about it as we go down through this service this morning? Be thinking about what the Lord would have you to do. There's several things. We were talking in our class the other night. You always think of a calling, you think of a preacher, and obviously the Lord calls, and I'm so thankful for the preachers that we have in our service this morning. Tremendous men of God, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But that's not the only thing that the Lord calls us to do. There's so many various other things that we could be doing. I could be doing more, and maybe if nothing else, this lesson was for me that I need to be doing more. But one of the things that I want to be known as when I leave this world, I hope I'm known as, because I've got several heroes of my faith. They were prayer warriors. And if something was wrong or I had a situation, I wanted that particular person praying for me. And if there's nothing else to be said about me, I hope that when I'm gone, somebody could say, man, if I had something wrong, I wanted him to be praying for him. I wanted him to be reaching out on my behalf. Be a prayer warrior. Visit. Go to the hospitals. Visit, our sick and shut-ins. There's so many other things that God may be calling us to do. And maybe we need to be just like that stone that had been, I don't know how long that stone had been laying there when David picked it up. But if we're that stone that's just laying there, there's more for us to be done. That implement was used in God's time and God's plan. Maybe it's time for you to be praying about what God's will is in your life. So I'm going to end with this. I kind of taught a lesson similar to this to our college and high school class here a while back. Talking about the fight, and let me ask you this. This would be a good question here. We're looking at several preachers and men that have taught for a long time in here. Why did David take 5 stones? Anyone have any theories or? Yeah. I mean, the easy question the world probably says, well, what if he missed? But so that, yeah. So I've heard that as well. I've seen some commentaries who say, well, he was just being, prepared. And then, there's a message in that as well. Make sure you're prepared when you go into battle. There's various things, but, that seems to be the most common theory is that, Goliath had 4 brothers. And I believe that David was brash and I believe that he was bold enough that he thought, well, if I have to kill all 5 of them, I will. I really think that David probably thought that. That's neither here nor there. But, as he takes these 5 stones, I don't know. This is, I'm not trying to take credit for this because I saw a message preached on similar to this. I've kind of used my own thoughts and put my own spin on it a little bit. But maybe these stones had special significance. Maybe if it was to no one else but to David. So I'm going to end with this. So David walks up to the brook and he reaches down and he pulls the first stone out. Maybe that stone signifies courage. He grabs that stone, he pulls that out, and he puts it in his shepherd's bag. We could all use some courage in our life, couldn't we? If you're here and you're unsaved, you need the courage to come forward this morning and be saved. If once you do that, that's the hardest part, is taking that first step. He'll take the rest of them with you. Maybe you're here and you're thinking, man, I know that there's more that I could be doing. I know there's a work that the Lord would have for me. Pray for courage. The Lord will give you the courage if you pray for it, and he'll help you. And just as David, he will equip you. He will provide in his time. Maybe that second stone he reaches out, he reaches down, he puts in his shepherd bag, he puts in the stone of faith. David had faith to stand before the giant. The Lord proved himself over and over in his life to him so many times. So he was able to have faith that no matter what, and, we can say what you want. He may have had, the faith, and he may have had the boldness and everything else, but he didn't know how that situation was going. When you go up against a 9-foot, warrior, you don't exactly know how that's going to turn out. But he had the faith to say no matter what. The Lord has proven himself to me and to this church so many times. So we can have the faith that no matter what comes this way. And of course, the verse that came to my mind there is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. No matter what our situation, no matter what we're facing, he will go with us and he will equip us. I think maybe David reaches in and he pulls out that third stone. He pulls out the stone of trust. Proverbs 5 and 6. I know Alan's going to, I told Lexi the other night, we're talking about different lessons coming up in our class. I said, I think I might the class may just be the class of Proverbs from now on. I think we could literally just start in Proverbs and just go and go and go and go and go, and you can never, ever really glean all of the information and all of the guidance and the wisdom that book has in it. But Proverbs 5 and 6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. We got to have trust. And because of the faith that we have, we can put our trust in him because he has proved himself over and over and over again. You go through this book and you try to find one time where the Lord said he would do something that he didn't. You won't. You try to find one time where he lied. You won't. You find one time that he failed. You won't. He's proved himself over and over and over again. We can trust him. You put your trust in man, somebody will let you down. No matter how close and how good you think they are, they will let you down. Put your trust in him. He'll never let you down. I think the fourth stone he reaches down and he picks up the stone of obedience. And, you know, are we being obedient this morning is the thought I'd like to ask you. Psalms 37:18, the Lord knoweth the day of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. Another way of saying, the Lord takes care of those that obey him, right? So it's easy to suppress that voice in the back of your head when the Lord's calling you to do something and you're saying, you know, Lord, I don't know. I think somebody else probably better at that than me, you know, or, you know, I just don't know. I'm not sure. As we read through this story, we see a young man that was not a battle-tested individual whatsoever, but he reached in and he took out a stone that the Lord had placed there, and through his obedience, he's able to slay the giant and create a miracle. What kind of miracle could you create in someone's life? Maybe it's one person's life. Maybe it's this church. Maybe it's this community. What if Billy Graham didn't accept the call to preach? I've been on a Billy Graham kick. I've been listening to some Billy Graham messages here lately. And, you know, what if Billy Graham didn't accept that call? Lord, yeah, I think maybe, I don't know. Maybe I ought to just have somebody else. Surely somebody else is a better speaker than me. You know, but what if the Lord's calling you and you're not obedient? You know, so which leads to the fifth stone. All these are things that we need to have in our life to be equipped and to be used. But there's one stone that you still have to pick up. David reaches down, he picks up that stone, puts it in his bag. It's the stone of action. We have to have some action. You know, the old saying, actions speak louder than words, right? We can think all these things. We can pray. We can be prepared. We can even be right at the brink of obedience and ready to go. But until you step forward in faith, it's just vain. We have to be willing to put forth the action. So I want to end with this. I'm looking forward to a wonderful service today. You're going to hear singing. You're going to hear preaching. You're going to hear good testimonies. You know, looking forward to a great day in the Lord. We'll get together and have fellowship later. But today could be the day that just as David, I don't know. You know, I wonder. You know, when David was taking these provisions out to his brothers, was it just like any other day? Did David know that today's the day something great's going to be happening? You may have walked in this service this morning thinking, I'm just going to sit in the pew. I'm going to, hopefully the Lord will bless. But as you're sitting here today, as you listen to the preaching, you listen to the singing, you know, I'm challenging everyone in here, including myself. There's more that we could do. Ask the Lord right now to speak to your heart and reveal that to you. And let's take these traits that we've seen and let's put them into practice. This could be the start of the best year that Bloom Church has ever had. Amen. And it could start right here on this very homecoming, 2024. So you may feel like you're just a stone setting in a brook, water rippling by. But if you're willing and if you're able to step out in faith and say, Lord, I know there's a work for you that you would have me to do. A simple stone doesn't seem like it has a lot of significance. But in the hand of God's man, in God's time, with God's plan, we saw a tremendous miracle. What if you this morning say, you know what? I don't feel like I've got a lot of, maybe I don't have a lot of value, a lot of worth. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a stone, just taking up space. Today could be your day where you say, Lord, use me. Just as David picked up a simple stone, I might not have the gift to be able to stand up here and proclaim your gospel. I may not have the best singing voice, but I can do something for you. Ask him. He will reveal that to you. So I challenge every one of us this morning. Just as David reached in that brook and pulled out a simple stone, it may have on the exterior looked as just a simple stone, unlike any others that you would see. May not have been anything special. What about exterior? You might have just said, "Well, it's just a simple stone," and that might be what you say. But in the hands of an Almighty God, we can see miraculous things happen. I'm looking forward to a great day in the Lord today. I hope you all do as well. Looking forward to another homecoming. Thankful for this church. Thankful for this congregation. God bless you.
Peter says, John, that we are lively stones.
Mhm.
Now, what does that mean? We don't just lay there.
Yep.
We're stones that God uses. We're lively stones. So he has a work for every one of us.
Absolutely.
No doubt Billy Graham had no idea the influence that he would have
Mm-hmm.
when he first started preaching. But that doesn't matter.
Yep.
Little as much when God is in it.
Yeah.
He's looking for a willing, obedient vessel.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that when you was teaching there about the courage and things, that one of the really big things when the Lord was calling me to preach was I would get ready to do it. I mean, I'd get ready. I'd think, I'm going to do this tonight. I'm going to announce it. Look out for it. Yeah, and then the thought would come to me, hey, once you do that, there ain't no going back.
Yeah. Yep.
You're going to have to stick to it.
Yep.
And I think maybe it was a while before I got the courage to say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna stick to it. No matter how bad I am, I'm gonna stick
Yep.
to it.
Yep. Yeah, if you don't have anything to pray for me, because I can always use it. And that's one thing in my life that I want to be. I want to be a better prayer warrior. If nothing else, if I don't have any other gifts or if I don't have anything else to add, I want to be used. I want to be a vessel for Him, and I want to always, hopefully, when people leave and after they've talked to me, I hope that they say, I want what He has. So pray for me. God bless you.